Ashley had been employed by a wealthy man as the caretaker for his young daughters, and while she had expected challenges, she hadn't anticipated how deeply entwined her life would become with theirs. One evening, Mr. Hunter came home earlier than usual, only to be overcome with emotion at the sacrifices Ashley had made for his family. Ashley took a moment to steady herself, inhaling deeply as she smoothed her wavy brown hair with trembling hands. She glanced at Olivia and Zoe, nestled under their blankets, their sweet faces illuminated by the soft glow of their bedside lamp. At 28, Ashley often reflected on the twists and turns of her life. Living and working in the Hunter residence on Steiner Street was never part of her plan. Yet, caring for these two spirited girls had given her a sense of purpose she had never known before. The 6-year-old twins, with their shining golden curls and striking sapphire eyes, looked as if they belonged in a painting. Ashley smiled softly as she adjusted Zoe's blanket, her heart swelling with affection. "Miss Ashley, can you tell us just one more story?" Olivia asked, her hopeful eyes gleaming like the stars outside. Ashley chuckled lightly, though her tone remained firm. "Sweetheart, it's already late. Your parents wouldn't be pleased to know you're still awake." The children's room, a haven of pastel walls and toy-filled shelves, contrasted starkly with the modest apartment Ashley called home. She stepped toward the window, parting the silk curtains to gaze out at the perfectly maintained garden. The night was unnaturally still, almost unnervingly quiet. A faint unease crept over her, sending a shiver down her spine as an indistinct sound reached her ears. "Girls, did you hear that?" Ashley asked, her voice light yet probing. Zoe, half asleep, murmured, "Probably Mr. Whiskers on the roof again. Daddy says the firefighters might need to rescue him one day." Ashley's lips curved into a brief smile at Zoe's innocence, but the moment passed quickly. She moved toward the door, her hand hovering over the light switch. That's when she heard it again, a faint creak from the hallway. Her pulse quickened, and her grip on the switch tightened. "What was that?" Olivia's voice broke the silence, her tone tinged with fear as she sat upright in bed. "It's probably just the wind," Ashley said, forcing a calm smile. "Go back to sleep, sweetie." Yet her mind raced with unease. The Hunters weren't expected back for hours. Who, then, could be in the hallway? "Stay here, Olivia," she instructed, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm just going to peek outside, okay?" Olivia clutched her blanket tightly. "You'll come back, right?" Ashley nodded, masking her own fear with a reassuring smile. "Of course, honey. I'll be back before you can count to 5." With one last glance at the girls, she turned the doorknob, her heart pounding in rhythm with the eerie creaks of the house. The hallway stretched out before her, dimly lit by slivers of moonlight filtering through tall windows. The heavy silence was punctuated by the occasional groan of the old wooden floors beneath her cautious steps. Every sound seemed amplified, her breaths quick and shallow as she moved toward the source of the noise. "Keep it together, Ashley," she whispered to herself. "The girls need you to be strong." Then, from the end of the hallway, came a muffled sound of faint rustling, like someone struggling against restraint. Her heart hammered as she focused on the built-in linen closet. She hesitated but felt compelled to approach. Her hand trembled as it hovered over the ornate handle. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back, but the thought of protecting Olivia and Zoe pushed her forward. "Is someone there?" she whispered, barely audible. Silence answered her, save for another faint, desperate noise. Summoning all her courage, Ashley turned the knob, the clicks echoing ominously in the quiet. The door creaked open, revealing a darkness so thick it seemed to hold its breath. Ashley froze, her eyes straining to adjust. Slowly she realized what she was seeing. Inside the closet, Mr. and Mrs. Hunter were bound with thick ropes, their eyes wide with terror, their mouths sealed shut with duct tape. "Oh my God," Ashley gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Mr. and Mrs. Hunter. Are you okay? Who did this to you?" Her voice trembled as she dropped to her knees, fumbling with the knots. Mr. Hunter shook his head violently, his wide eyes pleading with her not to proceed. The urgency in his expression froze her in place. A chill crept up Ashley's spine as a foreboding sense of danger overwhelmed her. In the dim moonlight spilling through the hallway, Ashley caught a shadow moving swiftly. Her breath caught as the figure emerged, a tall man in a dark mask, his eyes glinting with a cold, calculating malice. Instinct kicked in. Without a second thought, Ashley bolted down the hall, her bare feet barely touching the polished wood. "Help! Someone, please call the police," she screamed, her voice echoing into the still night. Behind her, heavy footsteps pounded, the masked intruder closing the distance. Reaching the staircase, Ashley glanced back and saw him, his outstretched hand inches from her. Summoning her last reserves of strength, she flung herself forward, skipping several steps in a desperate attempt to escape. At the sight before her, Ashley gasped. "Oh my God, Mr. and Mrs. Hunter. Are you okay? Who did this to you?" What happened? Her trembling hand flew to her mouth in shock. There, huddled on the closet floor, Mr. and Mrs. Hunter sat bound by thick ropes, their wide, terrified eyes glistening in the dim light. Their mouths were sealed with tape, muting their cries for help. Ashley dropped to her knees, her hands shaking as she frantically worked to untie the ropes, her heart pounding in desperation. Mr. Hunter shook his head vehemently, his pleading eyes warning her to stop. He seemed to be signaling danger, urging her not to proceed. Ashley hesitated but whispered, "I'll get you out of here. I promise." Her voice quivered as she asked, "Who did this?" She struggled with the unforgiving knots, her urgency mounting with every passing second. A sudden, icy dread washed over her, sending chills down her spine. The air around her seemed to thicken, heavy with an ominous energy. Ashley froze, her instincts screaming that something or someone was near. Slowly, she turned her head, the hairs on her neck standing on end. In the faint shadows of the hallway, a figure emerged, a tall, imposing man with a dark mask concealing his face. His cold, menacing eyes stared through the slits, exuding a silent but chilling threat. Ashley's knees threatened to buckle, but pure instinct propelled her to action. She bolted toward the stairs, her breath catching in her throat as she yelled help. "Somebody, please call the police," her voice echoed through the vast, eerily quiet halls of the Hunter residence. She knew no one was near enough to hear her cries, but she had to try. The masked figure was fast, his pounding footsteps closing the distance between them. Her fear spiked as she felt his presence closing in, an oppressive shadow chasing her. At the top of the staircase, Ashley stole a glance behind her. He was right there, his gloved hand stretching out, mere inches from her. Desperation overtook her as she lunged forward, skipping several steps in a frantic bid to escape. "There's nowhere to run," his gruff voice echoed menacingly, reverberating through the dim hallway. Ashley's feet barely touched the stairs as she raced down, adrenaline coursing through her veins. Her breath came in ragged gasps, each step louder and heavier in her ears. The creaking floorboards groaned under the weight of her pursuer's boots, amplifying the terror in her mind. "Think, Ashley. You have to find a way out," she urged herself, though her thoughts felt jumbled with panic. At the bottom of the staircase, disaster struck. Her foot slipped on the smooth surface of the landing, and time seemed to slow. Her arms flailed, desperately searching for something to hold on to, but the banister was out of reach. She fell hard, each step sending jolts of pain through her body, until she landed with a thud at the bottom. "No, not now," she thought frantically. "The girls, I have to protect them." Pain radiated through her limbs as she lay motionless, her vision blurring. She struggled to stay conscious, her thoughts fixed on Olivia and Zoe. In the haze of her vision, she saw the masked man descending the stairs, his approach deliberate, his shadow stretching ominously over her. "Please, someone help," Ashley whispered, her voice barely audible. Darkness began to close in as her strength waned. Her last coherent thought was a prayer: "God, please protect the girls." When Ashley's eyes fluttered open, she was greeted by suffocating darkness. Her head throbbed as she became aware of the ropes digging into her wrists and ankles. She was tied to a chair in the cold, damp basement of the house. Memories of the attack came rushing back, fragmented but vivid enough to make her heart race. The frigid air seeped into her bones, and the musty scent of the basement only added to her growing panic. Through the dim light, the outlines of stacked boxes and forgotten furniture came into focus. "Olivia." "Zoe," she whispered, her voice hoarse and strained. "What's happened to them? Are they safe?" Her thoughts spiraled, but she clenched her jaw, refusing to succumb to fear. Determined, she tugged at the ropes binding her. They bit into her skin, leaving painful, raw marks. Sweat trickled down her face as she searched the room with frantic eyes, desperate for anything she could use to free herself. Every sound in the basement seemed amplified the faint creaks of the house above, the occasional drip of water. Ashley's mind raced, fueled by a single purpose: to protect the girls. Her eyes locked onto a shard of broken glass glinting faintly on the floor nearby. Summoning her resolve, she shifted her weight, stretching her fingers toward the fragment. It was her only chance, and she refused to give up. On the far wall of the dimly lit basement, Ashley's gaze locked on an old, rusty saw hanging tantalizingly close but frustratingly out of reach. There must be a way out of here, she murmured to herself, her mind racing through every possible escape scenario. The eerie silence was suddenly shattered by a loud creak from the floor above, freezing her in place. Her body tensed as she strained to listen, her breath catching when she heard deliberate footsteps drawing closer to the basement door. Each step thundered in her ears, accelerating her racing pulse. "Stay calm, Ashley. You need to think clearly," she whispered, forcing herself to take steady breaths. The metallic clink of a key turning in the lock made her blood run cold. Her wide eyes locked on the door as she braced herself, certain that the masked intruder would appear at any moment. Each agonizing second felt like an eternity. Her heartbeat thundered so loudly she was convinced it would betray her hiding place. "If this is the intruder from the house," she resolved, "I won't let him intimidate me. I need to buy time for the kids. If I can distract him, maybe Olivia and Zoe will find a way to escape. I won't let them down." Gathering every ounce of courage, Ashley promised herself she would fight. The rusty doorknob turned, and the heavy door creaked open. A thin sliver of light spilled into the basement, slowly widening as the door swung further. A shadowy figure emerged, backlit by the faint glow, their silhouette tall and menacing. Ashley's body trembled, her breath shallow and quick. "Who's there? What do you want?" she called out, her voice trembling yet infused with defiant determination. In the room above, Zoe and Olivia were startled awake by the faint sound of Ashley's voice echoing from below. The twins exchanged worried glances, their innocent eyes wide with dread. Olivia, the braver of the two, swung her feet out of bed, her tiny bare toes pressing silently against the thick carpet. "Zoe, did you hear that?" "I think it was Miss Ashley. We need to check if she's okay," Olivia whispered, her voice filled with a mix of urgency and resolve. Zoe hesitated, clutching her blanket, but seeing her sister's determination, she reached out for her hand. The two girls, dressed in matching pajamas with colorful unicorn prints, tiptoed to the door. Olivia carefully turned the knob and cracked it open, peeking into the shadowy hallway. Finding it empty, she motioned for Zoe to follow, and the girls stepped out together. "What if it's a monster?" "We should just go back to bed," Zoe whispered, her voice quivering. Olivia squeezed her hand firmly. "Don't be silly, Zoe. Monsters aren't real. Miss Ashley might need us," she replied, trying to sound braver than she felt. They crept down the stairs, their small hearts hammering with every step. Unbeknownst to them, Mr. and Mrs. Hunter were still bound and gagged in the closet, unable to warn their daughters of the lurking danger. Reaching the bottom of the staircase, the girls paused, listening intently. Muffled sounds seemed to emanate from the kitchen. "Come on, Zoe. It's probably Miss Ashley. Maybe she's making us hot chocolate," Olivia whispered, tugging her sister along. Reluctantly, Zoe followed, clinging tightly to Olivia's arm. "But what if it's not her? What if it's something bad?" Zoe murmured nervously. The kitchen was cloaked in darkness, illuminated only by the pale glow of moonlight streaming through the window. As their eyes adjusted, Olivia's hand brushed along the wall, searching for the light switch. A sudden creak from the direction of the basement door froze her in place. "Zoe, look. Someone's there," she whispered, pointing toward the shadow emerging from the doorway. The figure stepping into the kitchen was tall and imposing, clearly not Ashley. The twins clung to each other, trembling as they crouched low behind the kitchen island. "We need to get out," Olivia whispered, her voice barely audible. Gripping Zoe's hand, she led her sister toward the back door, their bare feet gliding silently across the cold tiles. Olivia gripped the doorknob cautiously, turning it just enough to crack the door open. A rush of cool night air greeted them, carrying the fresh scent of cut grass and distant cricket chirps. "Slowly, Zoe. We can't let him hear us," Olivia whispered. The girls slipped outside, moving as stealthily as their small bodies allowed. Moonlight bathed the backyard in an eerie glow, casting long, jagged shadows across the neatly manicured lawn. Zoe clung to Olivia's arm, her voice trembling. "Where's Miss Ashley? I'm scared, Olivia." "We'll get help. Mrs. Patel will know what to do," Olivia reassured her sister, thinking of the kind neighbor who lived just beyond their fence. She scanned the yard, her heart racing as she searched for cover. Ducking behind a large hydrangea bush, the girls huddled together, their small frames hidden among the thick flowers. In the distance, a faint bark broke the silence, causing Olivia to peer cautiously through the leaves. The intruder was still searching, moving methodically through the backyard. He checked behind bushes and peered into the tool shed, his presence looming like a shadow that refused to dissipate. "Stay quiet," Olivia whispered, her voice a thread of sound. She gripped Zoe's hand tightly, their only hope lying in their ability to remain unseen. Olivia and Zoe moved swiftly, their hearts pounding with fear and adrenaline. "Mrs. Patel will help us," Olivia whispered, her voice trembling but determined. As they approached the fence separating their yard from Mrs. Patel's, something caught Olivia's sharp eye. Instinctively, she pulled Zoe behind a large hydrangea bush, the thick blossoms providing a perfect hiding spot. Both girls crouched low, struggling to steady their shaky breaths, their small bodies pressed close together. Peering through the dense leaves, Olivia's wide eyes fixed on the kitchen door just as it swung open. Her breath hitched. "He's coming," she whispered, barely audible, her voice shaking with fear. "Don't move." The shadowy figure stepped into the backyard, his tall frame intimidating under the faint light spilling from the house. His head turned side to side, scanning the yard as though he knew the girls had escaped. Olivia squeezed her sister's hand tightly, silently praying they would remain undiscovered. Suddenly the tense silence shattered. A loud bark echoed through the night, startling both girls. Mrs. Patel's dog from the neighboring yard barked furiously, its deep voice aimed directly at their direction. Olivia snapped her head toward the barking, panic surging as the intruder's attention shifted toward the sound. His piercing gaze swept the yard with renewed intensity. "Oh no, he's going to find us," Zoe whimpered, pressing her tear-streaked face against Olivia's shoulder. Without hesitation, Olivia acted. She yanked Zoe down to the ground and gestured for her to crawl toward the towering oak tree where their treehouse stood. They moved stealthily through the damp grass, the cool moisture soaking through their unicorn pajamas, streaking them with mud. Olivia's pulse thumped in her ears so loud she feared the man might hear it too. Reaching the base of the tree, Olivia sprang to her feet and urged her sister toward the rope ladder. "Climb, Zoe. Don't look back. Just go," she hissed, her tone firm, despite the fear twisting in her stomach. The girls scrambled up, gripping the wooden rungs with desperate strength. Zoe's breath came in quick gasps as she climbed ahead, while Olivia kept glancing over her shoulder to ensure they were not being followed. At last they reached the wooden platform of the treehouse, pulling themselves inside the familiar haven their father had built the previous summer. But the sanctuary now felt fragile and exposed under the weight of their fear. "Olivia, I'm scared," Zoe whispered, curling into a ball with her knees hugged tightly to her chest. Her tearful words tumbled out in a rush. "Where's Miss Ashley? What about Mom and Dad? Do you think they're home? What if he catches them?" Shh, Olivia urged, pressing a finger to her lips. We have to stay quiet, Zoe. I'll figure something out. Crawling to the small window, she cautiously peered into the yard below. Her heart nearly stopped as she spotted the intruder emerging from the kitchen door again. He moved with unnerving precision, his gaze sweeping every shadow and corner. He's still looking for us, Olivia whispered, her voice faint. We have to be super quiet. From their elevated perch, they watched as the man methodically searched the yard. He checked behind bushes, opened the tool shed, and even examined the old tire swing hanging from a nearby tree. His menacing presence grew closer, each step ratcheting up the tension in the small treehouse. Zoe whimpered softly, her small frame trembling. Olivia squeezed her hand, attempting to offer reassurance. He won't find us, she whispered. Remember what Dad says we're his little ninjas. The man moved directly under the treehouse, his head tilting upward to inspect the branches. Olivia's breath caught in her throat. His eyes, though partially obscured by his mask, seemed to pierce through the shadows. For one horrifying moment, she was certain he had spotted them. Where are you, you little brats? Come out, come out, come out, wherever you are, his gruff voice growled, cutting through the stillness. At that exact moment, Zoe shifted slightly, her elbow unintentionally nudging an old plastic toy. Olivia's stomach dropped as she watched the toy inch toward the platform's edge. It tumbled off the side, landing with a faint but painfully loud thud near the man's feet. The sound reverberated through the night like a signal flare. Olivia's heart slammed against her ribs. He knows we're here. The man's footsteps grew louder, heading toward the tree. Thinking quickly, Olivia tugged Zoe toward the large toy chest tucked in the corner. Her voice was a frantic whisper. Quick, Zoe. Get in and stay quiet. Both girls squeezed into the cramped chest, their small bodies huddled together. Olivia pulled the lid shut just as the ladder creaked, announcing the intruder's ascent. Inside the musty chest, the sisters clung to each other, their ragged breaths muffled in the oppressive darkness. Olivia silently prayed, gripping Zoe's trembling hand. Please, God, don't let him find us. Keep us safe. The man's heavy footsteps thudded against the wooden platform above them. He rummaged through the space, shoving items aside in his hunt. Each noise felt impossibly close, amplifying the girl's terror. Where are you hiding, you little pests? He snarled. Olivia clenched her eyes shut, thinking that if she couldn't see him, perhaps he couldn't see them. After what felt like an eternity, the sounds of his searching began to fade. The ladder creaked again, and the intruder's curses echoed as he climbed down. The girls stayed frozen, their muscles locked in fear. Minutes passed in silence until Olivia cautiously cracked the lid open. She peeked out, relieved to see the yard empty. He's gone, Zoe, she whispered. We're safe for now. Ashley and Zoe cautiously peered from their vantage point at the edge of the treehouse, their wide eyes scanning the yard and the house below. Zoe pointed toward a sudden flicker of light in their parents' bedroom. Look, Olivia. He's in their room now, she whispered, her voice trembling. Inside, the intruder moved with frantic purpose, ransacking the space. Clothes and belongings were hurled from drawers and closets, his actions sharp and deliberate, as though he knew precisely what he sought. His movements slowed as frustration crept in. He paused, rubbing his forehead. Then his gaze locked onto a large painting on the far wall. He muttered to himself, "It has to be here." With one strong tug, he tore the painting down, revealing a small, hidden safe. A smug grin crept across his face as he ran his fingers over the metal surface. Triumph flashed in his eyes. "Bingo," he whispered with satisfaction. "Now I just need to crack the combination." In the cold, damp basement, Ashley battled against the ropes digging into her wrists. The sharp pain of the fraying cords only fueled her determination. Her skin was raw, her breath ragged, but she couldn't let exhaustion claim her. Every second mattered, and her thoughts were locked on Olivia and Zoe. What if the intruder had already found them? What if she couldn't reach them in time? Ashley clenched her teeth, her body trembling as she gave the ropes one final, desperate yank. To her relief, they gave way, the sudden freedom igniting a new sense of urgency. She whispered fiercely, "I have to find the girls and get them out of here." Her eyes burned with resolve as she glanced toward the dimly lit hallway beyond the basement door. Quietly, she crept forward, her body aching with every step. The broken shard of glass she'd used to cut her bindings was still clutched tightly in her hand, the edges biting into her palm. She ignored the warm trickle of blood as it mingled with sweat. Her heart raced as she approached Mr. Hunter's office. Time was slipping away. The girls were still in danger, and Ashley knew she couldn't falter. "Hold on, girls. I'm coming for you," she murmured, her voice a mixture of fear and steely resolve. She pressed her ear to the office door, straining to catch any sound from within. When only silence greeted her, she cautiously turned the knob. Relief washed over her when it opened without a sound. The moonlight spilling through the window painted the room in pale light, revealing rows of neatly lined books and the imposing mahogany desk. Ashley darted toward the desk, frantically rummaging through the papers and objects scattered across it. "Please, God," she whispered. "Let there be a phone." Her fingers finally landed on the receiver, and she quickly dialed 911. Her hands trembled, the dial tone a deafening reminder of how alone she was. Time seemed to stretch, each passing moment an eternity. Ashley's eyes darted to the door, fear clawing at her chest. She couldn't afford to get caught, not when the girls depended on her.